Well, there's quite an intro there, Chris Styles. How you doing?
Hello, Michael. We're going to look at today on this podcast of FSUFO is UFO sighting with a bit of a difference. If you haven't enjoyed one of those things in your life, you probably think it's most likely to happen in the dark of night in the back seat of a car or out on a country road, perhaps even be in solitary. But today, we're going to see that these things can happen anywhere. Maybe a fine day at the beach, as this represents, as it was on September the 15th, 2018. And better yet, we're going to have one of the key witnesses there. We wouldn't be here today, in fact, if it wasn't for Justin Brown.
That's right.
And
Justin is the gentleman who recorded that clip, and we're going to see more of that. And we see Justin, who's joined us on the show. Welcome, Justin. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me today, guys.
Oh, it's super. It's super. It's great to have you on.
yeah, Justin Brown, we have you labeled here as a UFO enthusiast, but that doesn't quite cover it, does it? He's, I could call him a videographer, in the past at times a super fan. And I often refer to him when they say, "Hey, Chris, what's Justin about?" I go, "He's lightning in a bottle." You get him around and things just happen, and sometimes some very unusual things in this case. But more than anything, I can't overstress that we wouldn't be here today. There wouldn't have been the coverage. People wouldn't be speaking of the sighting as they do nowadays if it wasn't for Justin's powers of observation, because it all begins with that. And in a way, the phenomena kind of owed him one, and we'll tell that story a little later too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some pretty fancy footwork there, Justin, trying to get that UFO insight. We've got more clips to show the audience here, but how did you see that UFO, and what was how did it catch your eye, Justin?
Okay, so this is sort of a longer story. I know we have a bit of time, but please cut me off if I'm getting long-winded. But Chris can contest to this. This area that I'm in is in the video shoot of the UFO is an area of high strangeness. People like to focus on, let's just say, the Midwest, the four corners of the United States. When it comes to strange areas like this, there are a lot of different terms for it. Some people call them portal areas. I just call them areas of high strangeness. Turns out we've had one in our backyard for a very long time. In 1967, when that thing went down in Shag Harbor, it was the world's only government documented UFO crash. Everyone seemed to focus on that area. Chris is the foremost expert on that. But I think a lot of people don't realize that things have been ongoing since then. Chris has written books about it with Don and himself. And I think how it all transpired for me here was my interest in Chris years ago, having met him in conferences and so forth, as an artist over the years and radio and music. I sort of got into film, and I started filming the story of a man in that area who in 1976 witnessed a sea monster with his father. Turns out several other people in the town saw this thing over the period of about 3 days. So after shooting interviews with this fella, I decided to get some B-roll, background footage for people who aren't involved in film. That's what we sort of collect to fill in the gaps when telling a story. I knew that there was a lighthouse at the end of Cape Sable Island after having done a documentary on Heather Dowsett, who I'm sure Chris will bring up eventually here. She's an integral figure in this high strangeness of the area. So I went in that direction of that lighthouse to shoot some great B-roll. I figured it'd be nice to throw the drone up in the air, do a nice flyby, and Bob's your uncle. Turns out on my way to that area on the Hawk, I found a miniature lighthouse. I want to say 3 feet, maybe 2, sitting on a crop of rocks overlooking water. I had sent the command for my drone to land after getting the footage I wanted after flying by that little lighthouse. And upon doing so, watching the drone, as people do when they have expensive toys, this thing caught my eye up above. And that's sort of the genesis of how I sort of captured this thing. It was I like to call it a string of happy accidents, a lot of New Agers like to call it a string of synchronicities. Maybe it is that. I'm not the judge of that, but that's how it all sort of came together.
Wow. So that incident that we saw was the beginning, and I noticed that we didn't have your sound up really loud because we had the music there. But I noticed that you seemed to be perplexed as to why the passing bicyclists could not see what you were seeing, and just sort of rode by while you're obviously looking at something very strange. Is that what was going on there?
That's exactly what was happening. And actually, I had a telephoto lens with me attached to a camera. I've had tripods out there. The telephoto lens is large. It's like, you see a lot of bird watchers using these things. Incidentally, I bought this thing. Here's the other weird accident. I bought this telephoto lens because Chris was filming a shoot with the Cousteau family for an episode that they were doing, and I was chasing him in a boat. So I needed to have this lens to shoot Chris, right?
Right.
So I only had that lens because of Chris, which I incidentally had on location this day. So when the drone landed and I lost its batteries because I drained all 4 from the shoot, I happened to have this lens. And when I grabbed it, I put it on. No mistaking what I was doing. Not only did the bicyclist not stop or even look at me or talk to me or wonder, but like every car that passed, anyone I saw, no one seemed interested in what I was doing. I guess it was perfectly normal for a city slicker to be laying on the top of his roof of his Jeep, pointing straight up into a daylight sky. I can't explain that.
Well, that's not as strange as a lot of the things that will compete with the sea monster and many other things seen in Southwest Nova. But it, I must say, it was entertaining. The degree of war you went at with your gear, especially the tripod, trying to get focus on this thing at the zenith over your head. I have to point out that the initial contact from you, I was just outside Yarmouth in the village of Acadia, and as you know, there's so much luck that plays into this sighting because I was there to interview somebody about potential close encounter case, more so that than what one might label an abduction. And you and I originally were going to meet up, and there was going to be a second interview. Remember, there was a Yarmouth fisherman that had shot some footage of a UFO off the coast
I'm
while
just
they were
gonna
being.
just gonna jump in here for a second, Chris, before you go any further
Yeah,
with this. We have actually, because a lot of our viewers and listeners may not be familiar with the area, and Sean, our producer, has a map. Maybe we can show as you continue on there, and we can pinpoint where we're talking about in the world and in Canada. Yeah, you might as well continue, Chris, while
that
you
coming
set it
up
up.
short. Anyway, there we are. There's our province there, which kind of lays out and looks like a lobster claw at the Cape Breton end. But we're at the other end here, the southwestern tip of the province. And right there, you're seeing Daniels Head Beach on Cape Sable Island. And the island is connected with the mainland by a causeway, and that's where the majority of the sighting came to play out. That and the road just before it there.
So that
And
pen is pointing to the spot where you were, Justin.
that's right.
Yeah, that's Dickie Wickens, actually, one of the original witnesses from the Shag Harbor crash in '67.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and on that other map was it's just the bottom left corner near Shelburne there. So it's a little bit
yeah,
truncated there, but that's Southwest
yeah.
Nova that Chris is referring to.
Just a, yeah, and then Justin is quite right, of course, to emphasize this is an area of high strangeness. And not only that, two things you look for as a UFO researcher is sightings and encounters and incidents that involve high strangeness and high credibility. And of course, credibility comes with the numbers of witnesses, with the amount of detail and the quality of the data. But this is an event that almost didn't happen. His power of observation to see this when I was at high altitude. I was in Yarmouth. There had been communication before the point where the sighting began, which was he first contacted me was about 3:03 p.m. on that hot sunny day, and you know it's just the last thing we thought was going to happen. We called several times and agreed we probably didn't even have time to meet for lunch, and the next call at 3:03, Justin contacts me and he's wondering, where am I? Am I in Chag? He says, you got to get here right now, ASAP. There's a UFO hovering over the island. And I've been filming it for some time. And indeed he had. Well, I hang up the phone and say my goodbyes to the people we were interviewing. It was almost time to leave. Here's the part where it almost sounds scripted. One of our future guests on FSUFO, Heather Doucette, which Justin has mentioned, who, is an experiencer from Southwest Nova, and in fact, a former resident of Cape Sable Island, near where Justin was, and at this point, a resident of Shag Harbor. You can see where this is all kind of coming together. And the thing is, he calls, we pack up, we hit on the way there. The next phone call I get is from Lori Wickens, one of the original witnesses and the first person that called the RCMP detachment back in the day of October the 4th, 1967.
So you got some of the same players involved here. Of course, Justin, that's before your time,
Well,
1967.
even
But
before, yeah,
I
even
was just
before
going
the
to
huddle,
say, I mean,
Michael.
what are we looking at in this? We're going to look at some more soon, but I mean, what are we looking at, Justin?
Your guess is as good as mine. I've tried to play this thing over and over in my mind and what this could have been. And the best way to put it is this is some sort of unknown aerial phenomenon, plain and simple.
I have a few ideas, though, what it might be.
I have a lot of ideas, but I don't know. I'll leave it to you to postulate.
Well, like I say, we're going to look at a clip here further that I think, with highlights some of the things we pointed out. For all your
Well,
hard work that day.
maybe before
Yes,
we get
Michael.
into that, just for the audience, let's just maybe get some of the details out of the way, like potentially where it's coming from, where it's going, what altitude, and how it's moving before we really think about too much what it is. How is it moving? And was it directly overhead, Justin, or was it off in the distance?
So first of all, like I wear prescription glasses. I probably wouldn't even have seen this thing if I didn't have my glasses on. And I only had my glasses with me just in case I was down in Shag for night driving. And I also wanted to make sure I could see the drone because sometimes you can't see those things, Mike, as you know, as a filmmaker, they're quite far away. It wasn't exactly directly above me. It was sort of, I want to say, if I was it was just off on a slight angle, maybe 11 or 10 o'clock sort of away from where I was. But essentially, it was on what seemed to be some sort of locked trajectory. I mean, it was like Chris describes it. It was a Windex blue sky, not a cloud in the sky. The wind was minimal at best, but there were some winds, and Chris will go into the technical details of that. But
Yeah.
basically, it slowly, over that course of an hour, took the same path to get from where I was over to Daniels Head Beach, which is just a few minutes down the road from where I was.
Okay, so now we kind of have a sense of the direction it was coming towards land or towards the mainland. I would imagine you were pointing out towards sea, correct?
Well, actually, I was looking at an inlet opposite of Daniels Head Beach. So on that little map that you showed with Dickie Wickens pointing the location of Daniels Head Beach, I'm actually standing just slightly southwest of that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. I just wanted to help the audience get sort of the big picture before we delve into what the source could be and what this thing might actually be. I mean, obviously, one of the first things that somebody might say is, "Oh, it's a weather balloon," just like Roswell, the weather balloon.
Well, I can explain why it was not a weather balloon, because weather balloons, around the world, are coordinated their release. And in Nova Scotia, they're released around 9 in the morning and 9 in the afternoon. They get a global picture of data in all the different time zones that when you look at the actual launch times, it's simultaneous. So you get like a snapshot of the globe of the conditions, right? And there were none up there. There should have been nothing present at that time. The other thing is when you launch a weather balloon, typically they rise to a high altitude. It can take 90 minutes. When they reach 100,000 feet or so, they explode. You'll often see a mist as the helium or hydrogen, depending on which they use, escapes. This certainly didn't happen here. In fact, um, it took me and Heather in the vehicle from near Yarmouth to almost an hour to get there. And when I arrived on the scene, the UFO initially couldn't even be sighted. But there was a very basically I arrived for the last 7 minutes, and unfortunate for all Justin's hard work, and his batteries were dead and he was exhausted. By the time I arrived there, in some ways, and I'll explain what I mean by this, is that I got there for what I would consider perhaps the last and the best 7 minutes of the sighting. And the reason I say that is I saw features that I think just reduced the possibility to almost zero of conventional explanation for this thing. Justin's footage shows this thing, like you said, on a steady pathway moving, and we don't see any unusual features. While it was observation by our little group, and at this point, when I arrived at the beach, Justin's first call to me came in. I think I logged it at 3:03 in the MUFON report. By the time I get on scene, it's getting close to 4:15 p.m. and this thing was still persistent. However, I got to tell this because all the way there, Justin kept calling me back. Dickie kept calling me back. Other people called into me, and of course we're pushing our luck with the speed limit and other things. We made an unfortunate exit at Heather Doucette's thing. She's never lived it down, but eventually we got there. And when we get there, we pull into the little parking lot at Daniels Head Beach, and the next thing I see coming over the dunes, the beach there is, your typical sort of crescent sandy beach, lots of marram grass. And I picture Lori Wickens, who I know well, and Justin coming over the thing, walking toward us. And as we're getting out of my vehicle, my Kia, I look at Heather Doucette and I say, "Do you want me to translate the look on their face?" And what I'm thinking, of course, is this is going to be another UFO story of the one that got away, like a great fishing story. And Justin comes over and he's got a sort of whiny tone to him, which is unusual. And he's like, "Man, what took you so long? You should have been here." And of course, I thought this is how it'll continue to play out. Heather continued walking up the path to the beach till she had a line of sight with the ocean. Not a minute passed, and she hollers at us, "It's back." And Justin while he was doing this, was trying to show me an image on the camera, and he said, "I'll have to plug it in the Jeep. My batteries are shot." She hollers at, and of course we run, and the next part and second wave of the sighting unfolds really. And to me, it was good. I would have loved to have been there for the whole thing. I would have loved to had all kinds of other equipment there, but the last 7 minutes was very telling, data wise.
All right, well, let's talk about that 7 minutes. Uh, Preferably, it won't take 7 minutes to talk about it.
It will not. It will not take 7 minutes.
Just kidding.
Anyway,
But yeah, so basically, so the chronology is Justin notices while filming supporting footage for another project involving Heather Doucette, an experiencer and abductee. You come along this UFO, and you get it on camera, Justin. Kudos to you. You got it on camera, and and nobody else seemed to notice this thing. And then you call Chris, right? And Chris and
Right, exactly.
Heather and Lori Wickens, who Chris calls Dickie. Of course, Lori was one of the original witnesses of the 1967 Shag Harbor UFO incident. You all show up, and now you're all looking at this thing. So so pick it up from there. Whoever wants to pick that up.
Yeah.
Like Chris, this is your story here at this point at the beach. I think like my major experience happened earlier, but I was still there to witness it with you.
Yeah. Well, I can remember the first thing is I remember looking at you guys and saying, people are going to think this is scripted. What's the chance of me, you, Justin, Heather Doucette, an experiencer from the area, and Lori Wickens, one of the original witnesses of the Shag Harbor incident, which my work and others, had made famous, like being in the spot for the second crack at a good daytime UFO sighting. So anyway, we go over the head of the beach, and when I first look, Heather's pointing it out to us. It's out low on the horizon and some miles off the coast out to sea. And when I look at first, what I see is a really bright silvery light. And I'm not that impressed because what I'm looking at, is perhaps slightly more impressive than seeing Jupiter or Venus when conditions are really good. Just a bright silvery light in the distance. And I'm thinking, However, it shows up so well because, like Justin pointed out, it was a Windex blue sky. There are no clouds. There's no haze. There's no anything. It's a very transparent atmosphere. And over on the horizon, you have a quarter moon just above, sitting low in the sky. Well, anyway, as we watched, it was clear, and Heather and I both agreed and started saying that it's coming in our direction. You could see it was getting larger and moving toward us. Um, it just gets close enough. And while this is happening, Justin's in the background. He's telling me, well, you'll see when we look at the film footage later, in the Jeep and the camera, this thing had some kind of logo or stripe or thing on the side, some markings. Well, this thing continues in our direction for, I would say, perhaps a minute and a half or so. And when it gets near, just near enough that you can see that it's not just a silvery glow or a white sphere, but that there is some kind of markings, or I was starting to interpret them as a structure inside, like a beam or whatever, just some kind of linear structure. And then at that point, when this just becomes discernible, suddenly it's gone, it's disappeared. Now, the next thing that happens is the four of us there on the beach, we get into a huddle with our backs together. In my mind, it kind of looked like that REM video where everybody has their, was it stand in the middle or whatever. We all got our backs together, and we did this because we thought it could reappear in another direction. And Justin had told me, Chris, look, it's disappeared and reappeared before. So we watch after a minute or so of this, and interestingly enough, some people were starting to notice, wondering, what are we up to? I would have loved to have a video of us standing there with kind of an unusual little formation. And two girls that were leaving the beach, I can remember in Beachwear that day, they were walking by us and they go, what are you guys looking for? And just as they asked the question, Heather Doucette says, that. And she
We
points.
have a stabilized video of that object.
And again, it was still coming in our direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is at the point where it first reappeared, initially it just looked like a little black dot, and over about a second and a half, that black dot grew. And when it grew, it was an image that was almost like when you see photos of the total eclipse of the sun, except it would have been like a negative image where everything is black and the flaring coming out you had the impression it was pushing back the sky or something.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It looks like
Yeah,
there's a black ring around. That's not a camera
that's
effect, you don't think, huh?
no, 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 not at all. And like I say, when it first appeared as a dot on the second reappearance, as it grew, it remained black for, I'm saying a second and a half, could have been a second, three quarters, and then poof, it's as you see there again, right, with this black ring, and enough that you can see inside. So at this point, it's still moving in our direction and doing some gentle maneuvers back and forth. And I just arrange my fingertips in such a way there's some little checks you can do when you have nothing else at hand to see, be certain I wasn't just simply changing the position of my head or whatever of what was going on. We were so entranced at one point, a little rogue wave come in and we forgot how close we were standing to the water's edge. We all got wet feet and
Yeah.
kind of snapped us out. We bet you remember that,
Wow.
right? We did a little dance backwards, and it was then
Oh
when you
yeah.
realized we laughed how entranced we were. This
Yeah,
continues toward it.
Justin, would you concur with the assessments that Chris has made so far up to this point, from your observation?
Yeah, those are all basically what I experienced as well. But let me just point out that the video you guys just watched is unedited. There's no filters, there's no color, contrast, exposure. Nothing's been changed in that. All that is a zoom, a magnification of what I took.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when I was
Mm-hmm.
standing in the original location, that's exactly what I could see through the telephoto lens. Even with the naked eye at one point, you could make out the color.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely.
Directly overhead?
Yeah, I was at the
No,
closest zenith to that object
yeah,
where I was originally, and it was at
yeah.
its furthest point, Daniel's Head Beach.
but
All
when
right.
we're seeing it, when we're seeing it, Michael, it's offshore coming toward us.
Yes.
Right. So this is
Yeah, it's
later in the timeline.
this is later. This would be 4:15 to 4:20. I was there for the last 7 minutes of the sighting, let's say.
Yeah. So
And
Justin, what did you think what were you thinking when you got this thing in the camera? I mean, what was going through your mind?
You really want to know what I was thinking
Yeah. Yeah.
about
We
this?
all want to
This is
know.
where it gets a little bit weird. The clip that you saw actually was where I was originally standing, right? That's why we had such a good view of the structure itself, the spokes, whatever it was, the blue inside, the white shell, if you will. You can clearly see some sort of black corona, almost pinks, purples, and black at a real close level,
yeah,
which
yes,
sounds
We
like
have some
atmospheric ionization,
wow. We
yeah,
have some
something
enhanced
to that
stills
effect.
actually that Sean has queued up there. Maybe we can pop one of those up and you can
Yeah,
describe what we're looking at here. This is a much clearer view. It's a little small on the screen, but we have a zoomed
yeah,
in version too. But it looks like there's some details in there, like you're talking about. There's some different colors. I see a little bit of almost a
yes.
little of obviously some blue and a little bit of pinkish in the left hand side, and this weird Democritus swirl in there.
Yeah, what I think you're actually looking at here is we're almost looking vertices on to like a partial cube that's inside, or at least a partial view of a cube. It's a little hard to tell in this enhancement, but it does bring out some good details, right? We're
Mm-hmm,
looking at
mm-hmm.
enhanced contrast here that Sean's blown up for us. The original enhancement was done by a MUFON investigator that looked into the case because it is registered with them. To take us back to the beach there, when this second sighting got to that point, I can remember Heather Doucette looked at me and says, "If it gets any closer, we'll have all the answers. We'll see everything." And just as she said that, for the second time, the orb disappears. It's gone. This time we didn't get into that huddle. We just kept looking out to see it. Somehow we felt like it would, if we were lucky enough that it would reappear, that it was still coming in our direction. Justin, bless his heart again for something else. He looked at me and said, "You want me to get your binoculars?" And he ran flat out for my car and he got my Steiner binoculars, which is a great thing. And I don't mean to sound like a commercial, give a product plug, but it was great that I had those ones with me that day and not some others because they have a great feature where you know that from 60 feet to infinity you're in focus. Because in this case, and with many what I call soft UFOs, sometimes you're looking at a translucent surface or light phenomena. It's hard to be sure that you're in focus, and with them, I knew I was.
Well,
So
that
anyway,
certainly looks like it's in focus. Like
it is,
it doesn't
yes,
seem to be a focus issue. Uh, so I think you got that covered. I mean, you see the details inside this thing. I mean, it definitely doesn't look like what I would consider to be a weather balloon, which tend to be teardrop shaped with the package hanging
hmm.
underneath it. It's obviously not a drone. I mean,
Well, like I say, weather balloons, they rise up to the point where they eventually explode. This thing at this point, Michael, wasn't just moving toward us. It was slowly descending in altitude. So that was a gentle aspect. I could barely discern that. Anyway, Justin comes back with the binoculars from my car. And I no sooner get him on, and we had that third and final reappearance. And when it reappeared, I just raise them and I get my bead right on them. And I realize I'm looking into this thing. And inside this thing, it was very confusing to look into because basically what I'm realizing, and at this point, even Justin and others that were witnessing this were starting to say, it looks like a peace symbol on it or in it or something. But really, what I believe I was looking at and was looking at a cube vertices on. It was hard to be certain of that at first because the sphere, the material that made up the orb itself, is translucent. It's not perfectly transparent. Parts of it were glinting the bright sunlight back on that day, and other parts, it seemed to have a white or milky texture to it. So you're not getting a perfectly clear image, but I've seen enough, particularly through the binoculars, that I could see there was a cube inside its structure. And also in the lower right-hand corner, there was some tiny spheres and, like Justin said, some great colors that don't readily jump out, but they were there to be seen if you were on site that day.
I
Yeah.
actually
So
have
go ahead there,
other
Justin.
stills, Mike. Sorry, there are other stills that I have that I had queued up
Mm,
for a presentation I did
Mm.
right before the pandemic in Shag Harbor one year, and I think we had some technical difficulties that day, so I couldn't show them. But there are other images where there are other artifacts in the sky with this thing. Like
yeah, we have
there is
a
one.
zoomed in one. We have a zoomed in one. Will pop up there while you're talking there, Justin.
Mm.
Just continue
I'm
on there.
talking
We'll get you.
separate artifacts. Like there is the original object, but then I actually seen smaller objects in a different part of the sky. And unless somebody's
Mm,
making drones that look like universe bubbles, um, this is definitely an unknown.
Mm.
mm, mm, mm.
Uh,
What was clear,
it's
yeah, but
just
drones don't disappear and reappear, and it was real clear when this happened twice in that last 7 minutes. If you really think back, Justin, remember like on the reappearances, I can remember as a group we kind of made a cooing sound. Ooh, we'd all go like when it
yeah,
would come back. Like
Mhm,
you knew it
mhm.
was there. I mean, that's the beauty that day. We had such great viewing conditions, right? There was no
yeah.
doubt
Oh,
about
there.
what the details.
Yeah, well,
I
I mean,
mean, this is
speaking
a
of viewing
very
conditions, yeah, look at this.
it's perfect. It's spectacular. I mean, look at this thing. This looks like, honestly, you hear these descriptions, and I jokingly said it looks like, if someone was making drones that look like universal bubbles, like clue me in, because you hear this all the time that we live in this multiverse, and sometimes these universes bump into each other and collide. It's almost like you're looking at maybe one of these universes puncturing through space time. It's so unusual looking. There's something happening inside there. It doesn't seem to be strictly,
Mm.
a tangible metallic structure, although it could be maybe some unknown science. But Chris and I have postulated a lot of what this could be. I've got this book
Yes.
back here. Chris and I talk about it all the time by Trevor James Constable. It's an old book, but it's called Sky Creatures, right? Like, is it possible? And Chris has postulated this before that we might be looking at something that is a potential atmospheric life form, intelligent or not, doesn't matter. Are some of these things that people see, and maybe even this one, some sort of organic life form? You see this stuff in space
Mm.
too. When they do these space missions, you see these
Yes.
spheres and these circles in space as well.
Yeah.
What is that? Maybe it's
Yeah.
the same thing.
Story Musgrave has claimed to see these things in space. They usually refer to the sighting that he's more famous for, where he said he saw a creature and it was like a snake when he was in orbit outside the space station and the shuttle, right? But yeah, this is something that's been batted around, and even boy, that brings back a memory looking at this clip here. See, now that's another, I think, contrast enhancement. You can see how the black line there gets exaggerated. But
You
when you were
really
there
see
looking
it
at this,
there. Wow.
yes. But when it would
The,
first reappear, Michael, it would be all black, and then it would settle into that. But and besides that, it's so hard to describe because there was a lot of things. The other thing is, I believe it was a source of light, not just reflecting the bright sunlight of the day. And
yes, I agree.
yes, it was really odd that way. So you're trying to describe several features that don't quite fit in together. And you know what this reminds me of? One of the things in investigations in many classic cases here in Atlantic Canada, I run into this all the time. People will tell me, particularly with orb sightings, that this thing was glowing or it was really bright, but it didn't illuminate anything around it. It didn't give off any light. People always struggle to describe the quality of the light with these things. And after being present for this great daytime sighting, I share that. I understand, the loss for words, something I rarely am, but it just never
Yeah,
quite
this.
suffices, does
You
it?
had a loss of words. Hard to
Yeah,
Yes.
imagine
I
this.
think
21
every
years of
word was
knowing
the
you.
F bomb. Oh, yeah, Chris too.
Hey, you're the F
Uh,
bomb guy.
no shame,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
shame here. But that video you just saw, that was an enhancement of the contrast and the exposure to sort of
Yeah.
illuminate those details that we had talked about previously. I
Yeah.
think it's important. I do want to get this out before I lose that train of thought. Chris talks about this whole concept of a cube inside a circle. and this is really important to me because I sent a video to you guys. I'm not sure if we're going to use it, but it talks about my belief in the importance of this area and the future of investigation into this area and how we
Yeah,
need to
very
treat the
much so.
narrative itself, right? I think a lot of
Yeah.
the funding and the opportunity is going to come from the idea that this thing should be considered a threat. And I'm going to say why. I contacted New Fork in the United States to report the case. He told me to fill out a report. I did that. I mentioned this in the lecture I did on location a couple weeks ago. I also contacted CBC, CTV, the local news outlets. No one was interested that there was an unidentified craft in and around sensitive installations. Now, if they're not interested in an unknown around sensitive installations, there's something fishy
Mm-hmm.
going on here, right? I think the
Sensitive
phenomenon has been treated
installation.
so poorly for so long. Well, I mean, previously, Chris can talk about the sensitive installations that have and maybe possibly still are there, right, Chris?
Well, you have I think what you're referring to is the remaining automated station at what used to be Canadian Forces Station Barrington at Back Road, to give it its full and correct name. Well, we were there at Daniels Head Beach. When you look to the, what would it be, east, southeast, you can see the dome of the automated station that remains, and that is that end of the Pine Tree line. Everybody's familiar and heard in old movies about the Dew line, but there was and is a Dew line, Mid Canada line, and Pine Tree line, and
Yeah,
that
that do
radar
is just
facility,
for the audience that may not know.
just
That
an
means
early
distant
warning.
early warning. Yeah, which is a
Yeah,
set of radar installations that was across the Canadian North, right? Right, Chris?
that's right. There was a NORAD facility. It was across the north in there, so they could monitor incoming Soviet missiles or incursions by Soviet bombers that would test our defenses and our interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and before I lose a train of thought, I want to, you know, you think about the start of his sighting when this thing was at higher altitude and he couldn't interest the cyclists that went by. When we were
Mm-hmm.
on the beach, remember I mentioned the two girls coming up, and there was still a lot of people. It was that last summery day in Nova Scotia. People were in the water on the beach in bathing suits and that. And when those two girls stopped and said, "What are you guys looking at?" We're in the forum. When it reappeared, when they looked, their reaction was they ran for their car because you know, what do you do? But when Justin points out, I know he's thinking at some point these things may be hushed or whatever, and that certainly is a possibility. But you know what? I think the greatest thing against us is here what you're seeing, and it, whether it was the gentleman on the cycle going by, or whether it was the media that had little interest in your sighting and your film footage, right? Our greatest enemy for bringing what I call UFO reality into the light of day is apathy. Apathy. Many people have grown up in a world where to them, you know, fictional treatments and NASA and some of these things have become boring. It's so commonplace. So what? They just assume that the premise is correct. But what I find interesting is these orb sightings and this activity, and you rightfully point out in Southwest Nova, could indicate other things. Yes, the ETH is on the table, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This could be that. This could represent some unknown extraterrestrial, even interdimensional penetration of our skies and our defense systems, I guess, too, by some high tech thing. But there are other things on the table, and you point out the work of Trevor Constable, books like Sky. He had several. And let me tell you one of the theories here that could apply here, since you point out the automated facility. Think about this. In one of Constable's book, it wasn't the one about the sky creatures. I think it was his previous one, and the title eludes me at the moment. He thinks that most of the time these things are innocuous and around. And he used to try to take pictures of them with old scientific silver halidite film that was geared up to get ultraviolet light, non infrared or whatever. And he would take these images and sometimes capture these where they weren't present in the visible light. And he thought that's what this was. I think some of that was of merit and some of it wasn't that he did. However, here's the cool part is he thought that the few times when people reported these things as being hostile or intrusive or threatening was it when they were near powerful radar facilities. And he thought this stuff aggravated them. And, when this was happening that day, of course, that was in my mind. And I kept glancing over at that ping pong ball in the distance that sits on top of the automated tower now. But that was very much his theory. And, he even went so far as to give numbers like where he thought, if the systems were like 40,000 watts or whatever, and these things were within a mile of them, they seemed aggravated by the radar beams. It crossed my
So you're
mind.
saying that these things are either curious or affected by. I mean, there's so many issues. There's so many issues surrounding this. It's very easy to get into the weeds. But if we just back up a little bit, I mean, basically what we have is an orb in the sky that I think we've more or less determined is not a weather balloon.
No,
So it's
it's
not a
nothing
drone.
conventional.
Yeah,
No.
it's not a drone, obviously, because we have. It's interesting that I've heard so many self-satisfied scientists say that, well, if there were UFOs, we'd have better film footage and videos and pictures of them. Well, there's a plethora of them available
Well,
on
there
the
is, yeah.
internet, and this is just another example of an
There's,
excellent
yeah,
documented evidence of an unidentified flying object, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
what
Yeah.
we're looking at here. So the
yeah,
question
Yep.
I
but
would have is okay, regardless of how it's reacting, uh, did you get the sense that many people do, Justin, that it knew that you were watching it? That's a lot of
That's an
people have
excellent
described
question.
that.
It's an excellent question, and I'll tell you how I felt on the scene. Probably shouldn't say this, but I feel like somehow, because I was engaging myself into the unknown, there's this quote by Nietzsche. He says, "You stare into the abyss." Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. The abyss begins to stare back. Right. So
Hmm.
I had been digging in to this area with Heather Dowsett and her abduction experiences, to Rodney Ross and his sea monster experiences. I'm in the area. I spent a whole lifetime. You can see behind me a whole library of books. Been interested my whole life, and I kind of come in and out of it. And while filming in this location, surrounding myself with people involved in this field, like Chris and I have been friends for many years now. I'm grateful to call him a friend. I felt as if my moments of doubt were obliterated in this moment. And somehow this thing was communicating with me. I hate to use the word communicate because there's all kinds of jargon you can attach to that and stigma. But I felt like the message was clear for me that it was like, hey, just get over yourself. We're here, whatever we are. We seem to be some sort of intrinsic part of whatever is happening here on Earth. And just get used to it. And that's sort of the way I felt. I had almost an epiphany moment where it erased all doubt that I had maybe in the gaps in time in the past.
This is not the first time that you've experienced an orb, and I understand from Chris that you and Chris were on your way from a convention in I think Toronto or Montreal, and you're on the road, and maybe you guys could tell that story quickly,
well,
and then once before you do,
mm,
after that, I'd like to just go back to the image and we talked about the internal structure, and I want to just
Yeah,
make a
that's
mental
key.
note for
That's
us
key, Mike.
that
yeah,
Yeah,
okay, and
yeah.
there's
so
something I
let's
want to
tell that
mention
story
about
and then
that
we'll do
too.
that. Yeah. Oh,
Oh, there
yeah.
you go, Chris.
There it is. There.
Well,
Yeah.
okay.
Look at that.
There I am. There's my powers of construction here. As I've said to many people, the hamster wasn't happy. That was his ball, and and those and those sticks were actually edible treats that I glued together with hot glue.
But you're
What
proving a
I'm
point
trying to
here, right, Chris? You're trying to prove a
Well, I'm
point here.
trying, and I'm hopefully I don't know if Sean has the other image. That there's two. The point that what this shows out, if you see the two, I don't know if we have both, is when you look at a cube inside a sphere from the two different angles. In one of the views, it is very clearly a cube, but when you look at it from the other direction, vertices on, it appears more as a peace symbol, right? Which is what many people describe, and that is significant too, because what we did find out in the MUFON investigation afterward, actually before that, here's the other thing how this fits together. This is just incredible. Remember, I said I was in Yarmouth with Heather Dusat, the woman in Yarmouth that we abandoned, and I'll forever regret not inviting her along so we would have had another witness, because she was, get this, a physicist who was about to tell us about her experiences. when we left her place, she did some looking into it and found a MUFON case that saw exactly the same thing 50 weeks before over Mattawa, Ontario, which is near North Bay, right?
So you mean
Exactly the same.
described in the same manner, like we're
Yes.
looking at here
Yeah,
now, an
not
orb
just
with
described,
a
but they
peace
have
symbol?
photos.
Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
with
yes, and
an
that's how
orb and a
people
piece of it.
interpret it there. Yeah,
Okay,
and
so
they
they have
have
photo.
photos too. The one
Yeah.
thing that
Yeah.
was interesting too is another thing was when I wrote this up for MUFON and reported this sighting to them at the request of the head of MUFON Canada, Stu Bundy at the time. Um, we found when we found that connection with the other sighting, unlike us, they didn't have that perfect sky. They had good viewing conditions and a good sky, but there was a cloud deck known to be at about 6,000 feet. And in my estimate, I'd estimated, and it was hard to do that day just because an Airbus passed over later, and I looked at the amount of haze between that, and it was at full altitude, obviously. I made the guesstimate that this was at 5 to 6,000 feet when we first saw it. And when we looked at the sighting there, it was the same size, initially and through most of it. And it was seen to enter the lower bottom of the cloud deck, which was known to be at the altitude. So my guesstimate was good with little to go on. But
So you're saying this
yeah,
thing's at several thousand feet, and also at
yes,
Cape Sable during the recorded Justin's recorded incident.
yeah, and yeah. So I guess
All
you
right.
you wanted Justin or me to tell you about.
Yeah, let's
Remember
let
when I first.
Justin's got something that Justin's
Yeah, I remember when
chomping
we
at the
first
bit
come
to
on.
interject on this.
I
Yeah,
just want to
Justin,
say,
go
Yeah.
ahead.
remember
Just
how? Yeah,
Yeah, just go
just
ahead,
remember that.
Justin.
quickly,
The,
two quick points, Chris.
yeah.
I was actually supposed to be with Chris when he went to interview this lady, this physics teacher. And I couldn't make it because I needed to be here to do some stuff
Mm,
in Cape Sable Island with Rodney Ross. So had I gone with Chris to begin with, none of this stuff would even have
that's
transpired.
right. That's right.
Now,
Yeah.
point number two is after I saw this thing and filmed this thing, this is where it gets interesting. I had a flashback of 2001 when I lived in Calgary, Alberta. I tried to tell Chris one time, I'm not sure if he caught it, but I was the manager of a restaurant at that point, and I was on my way home. I was walking because I only lived a couple blocks away at that point. I literally had a UFO sighting that day that lasted for, I want to say 15 seconds or so. That from a distance, without the aid of a camera or telephoto lens, gave me the exact same impression I had when I first saw this thing at Cape Sable Island, which was, oh, look at that ping pong ball floating through the sky. But
Huh.
completely, for
Mm,
whatever reason, had erased that from my memory until I saw this thing at Cape Sable Island. And
yeah.
I wondered to myself to this day whether or not that was another similar situation and I just wasn't paying enough
Well,
attention.
Now,
like I
Chris
said
told me,
Anyway,
earlier.
Justin. Chris told me a story, Justin, of you guys traveling back, and you had another
Oh
encounter with
yeah.
UFO. And this time,
Yeah.
you weren't quite as prepared. Unfortunately, you weren't
No.
quite as prepared to capture
No.
this on video. Chris,
Oh my. I got
what
to tell
happened
this
there,
one. This
Chris?
is too much. This is too much fun. Um, Remember at the start of this, and this is what I was thinking of even then when I said, "Listen, the phenomena owed him one. They owed Justin one." I'll tell you why. I was presenting at the MUFON convention in Toronto. That was what 2017, 18, 18. Yeah, 18. Of course, same year as the sighting, and we were up there, and oh, it was a great road trip. Justin came up with me. There would be so many side stories you could tell. We're not going to waste that time here. But anyway, at the convention, he followed me around. Oh my lord, like a puppy dog. And he filmed everything. If I sat down and somebody bought me a drink at a bar, or the all the negotiations for the upcoming documentary with the Cousteaus, and there was just so much just stuff. He caught every aspect of. I thought, God, he could do a documentary just on this weekend at the MUFON convention, and maybe that was his intent. Anyway, whether it was or wasn't, it was a lot of fun. It was a great trip. On the way back in the car, he would videotape me and we would talk. There was endless questions. We were listening to podcasts. We were exhausted and tired. We ended up making a slow trip back, and the first night we stopped and stayed in Cornwall, Ontario. Okay. The next morning we had a little business to do before we pulled out of town. And I went and did some banking at I can remember on the main street there at the Scotia Bank, and we had picked up a couple coffees at Tim Hortons, and we're sitting in the parking lot and saying, well, we're not going to push it too hard. We're only going to go, I can't remember, to Montreal today or whatever. So Justin sitting there, he looks at me, he goes, do you think I can finally take a break? I got to do something to my camera here. He said, I need to take the camera body apart on your, was it your EOS there? You know,
Yeah.
and I'm saying,
What's
yeah.
going on there? Justin, do we have your audio?
Yeah, sorry
Just
about
go ahead.
that.
Okay, we got you. Okay, that's good. Yeah. What was going on there, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I needed to take a second to sort of recalibrate, change some
Yeah.
batteries, check some lenses, this sort of stuff, right?
You
And
asked
Chris
my
was,
permission. Remember?
oh, did I? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
He
because I'd
said,
been filming as a little
he
joke.
said,
I
I'm
said,
not going to
yeah, you
miss
mind if I
anything.
take
I
a break?
want your permission. And I promised him, I said, the mothership's not going to land. I have nothing profound to say. You have my blessing, Justin. Take the camera, enjoy your coffee, break. And we're sitting in my car. And go, Justin.
Yeah, so we actually we pull out. Is it true that we were driving, as far as my recollection is, we had pulled out of the gas
No, no,
station?
no, no. We were sitting in the parking lot there next to. We had coffees. We were after I was done banking. We were on the main street. We were in a mall parking lot. It was about 10 in the morning.
Okay, my recollection is we pulled out. This is mine. It's okay to disagree, but
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
you said what is that? And I said what is
No,
what?
yeah, no, no. This is not how I remember it. No, no.
This is
You
how
took
it's
apart your.
funny how,
You asked permission to take apart your. Oh,
yeah. So
go
this
ahead.
was after.
Tell
So
your version.
okay,
Go ahead. Yeah.
so we're driving down the road in my mind, and I'm trying to get the camera figured out. And you said, "What is that?" And I said, "What is what?" And you pointed over to the side, out the passenger window, and I looked, and didn't I
Yeah.
see some strange, flat, undulating? I
Yes.
can only
Yes.
describe it as a disc reflecting light
Yeah.
as it sort of toppled like this,
Mm.
uh, reflecting light back and forth at me. And at this
Yeah.
point, I tried to put the camera back together. I couldn't get
Oh
it put
yeah.
back fast enough. I said, Chris, pull over here. We're going to pull into the parking lot and see if we can find out where this thing went. So Chris pulls into this parking lot, and we park the car,
Mm.
and it's gone. There's nothing we can do. We lost the shot.
Okay. Yeah.
The one that got away.
Yes,
Yeah.
this one got away. And okay, I remember now. We're both correct here. Yeah, we started in motion and I pulled into the lot. That's what it was. Okay.
Yes,
But I'm
that was the
remembering the
aftermath.
part we pulled into the lot because Michael, he was doing himself physical damage trying to get this camera back together. I remember
Well, I
you
think it's
flung the
fair to
glove.
say that Justin's a very dedicated videographer. I
Yeah,
understand that Justin has got a lot of film footage of you as well. Um,
yeah,
so just going back, so I just wanted to establish the fact that this is not Justin's first chance to it, the first attempt.
no.
We had a truncated attempt to get a UFO on that trip, and now you've
Yeah.
got a UFO on camera. That's incredible. I mean, there are people who probably would
Yeah.
give their left arm to get footage like you have. And I think it's fair to say that we've fairly safely established that this is an unusual object. And on that note,
It's an
I just want to go
unknown.
back to that.
Mm.
I just want to go back to that discussion of. I find it very fascinating, that feeling of being watched. Did you have that same feeling at the time when you were on the trip with Chris, Justin, and you were trying to put the camera together, or were you too busy to get a sense that it was there for your enjoyment?
I think when you're following around an author like Chris, who has spent his life investigating UFOs, you're hoping something like that's going to happen, right? Like that. Not
Mm.
only is that like a really affirming moment, but I mean that's going to be some ultimate footage. But obviously, like you say, you become so wrapped up in the moment of what you're doing, there's not really much time other than to focus on the gear. Are you in focus? Are you capturing audio properly? Are you getting to the crux of what you're trying to get? And as a
Mm-hmm.
byproduct, these things just happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could say differently. I wish I could say maybe it felt like we were being watched, but I can't say that personally.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll tell
It's
you what I
difficult to see.
did. I would like to point out what I did note when we were at the beach at the end. And remember, we talked about this when we were in the aftermath, is after that final third reappearance. Again, this is in that last 7 minute segment when I'm present. Remember when it was over, we all walked back to the parking lot. It was like we knew it was over. There
Yeah,
wouldn't be another reappearance. You remember that? Nobody, And remember, it was about like 50, maybe 30 minutes later when we broke up, and I said, how did we know that wasn't coming back? And we all looked
Yeah,
at
how
one
did you
another.
know that? How would you know
How did we
that?
know it wasn't coming back? But as soon as it was over, it was like, there it is, the curtain's down, you leave the theater. Do you remember that was our? But we didn't see it as that way, right? But I'm going to tell you, Michael, listen, they were all affected. I mean, one of the great things for me as a researcher at the time, I'm watching this great sighting. He'd already gotten the footage, and all this last part we have no footage of. But if I was asked would I like to have been there earlier with Justin, oh, I'll take the 7 minutes I had, because the
Yeah.
features we saw through that time speak of the unconventional nature of it. They cemented that interpretation. Okay, but
Your binocular view
yes,
showed details that maybe we don't even see in the JPEGs we put up on the screen.
oh, very much so, and absolutely confirmed
Like what?
the sudden
What kind of
disappearance and
details?
reappearance. The materialization of it,
Yeah.
right?
So you'd say it would periodically disappear and reappear. It wouldn't
Yes, yes.
that you lost track of it. It wasn't
Yeah,
that.
no, it definitely wasn't. Toward the end, it was close enough and large enough in frame. You know what I mean? There was no doubt. The thing was, too, what I couldn't discern is whether it was a case of what you might call instant acceleration or a dematerialization. But my
Right.
impression was it was just gone. Just like you flipped the switch, it was there and it was gone.
Okay,
And if
I'm
you
going to
go
bring
through
up
the
the
footage,
elephant in the
actually,
room.
you'll hear me say the same thing in the original location. I actually lose track of
Mhm.
it, and I'm bewildered on how I could just not see it anymore, and then
Yeah,
all of a sudden I'd
yeah,
see it again.
Right.
yeah,
So
Right.
I corroborate that end of the story as well, even
yeah,
from my
Right.
vantage
yeah.
point
Right.
earlier.
Well,
Hmm.
let's address the elephant in the room. Is like, what the heck are we looking at here? I mean, any thoughts, Justin, on what it might be?
Well, first of all, Chris, for whatever reason, is some sort of magnet for this stuff. And I like to pretend and put myself in front because I love my ego. And it's like, no, it's me. It's because Chris is hanging out with me. Let me just tell you a quick story. I won't digress too hard, but we did a presentation, or Chris did a presentation one year in Shag Harbor for the conference there. And they were introducing the new Shag Harbor coin, and they
Oh,
presented the
yeah.
coin to Chris on stage.
Yeah.
And there were two representatives from the Mint
The Royal
there to do
Canadian
that.
Mint. Yeah.
Exactly. And that night, my wife and I and my son were sleeping in a cabin, and my wife woke up. She was completely startled. She thought there was somebody in the cabin. So I woke up. Obviously, the kids in the bed with us. I'm a little bit afraid. The door we had closed at bedtime was now wide open. I run out. I'm checking all the windows and doors, making sure there's no prowlers in the house. When I hear commotion outside, or no, yeah. So anyway, I go back to bed after everything's fine and dandy, and I go to pay for the room that next morning. And who comes out from their room? But the ladies from the Mint, and they said we've been outside all night watching this thing over our cottages, and we were bewildered. I said, well, what time was that? And it was literally the exact same time that my wife woke up from this dream, that there was somebody in the cottage, right? Now, this is like in close proximity to Chris, right after we did this presentation. The ladies actually got footage of what they were seeing that night, and they sent it to me
Where
in the
was
past.
this?
Anyway,
Where was this?
this was in
Sag
Shag
Harbor.
Harbor,
Oh, it was in
Sag
Shag
right
Harbor.
Harbor.
down
Yeah.
in the middle of this tiny
Yeah.
town, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if Chris
Yeah.
is a magnet or what, but there's a lot going on. In terms of the object here that we're looking at on September 15, 2018, like I said in the beginning, there's no way to really pin down what we're looking at, but it's certainly nothing conventional. I think it's something we need to look at more closely and analytically. I think that there needs to be more funding put into this. The whole reason I wanted to talk more about the cube inside the sphere is because it relates back to this release of information starting in 2017 with the Pentagon,
Yes.
Leslie Kane, ATIP, Luis Elizondo. There
Yes.
was a pilot who had seen a very similar thing. He said there was a square inside a sphere. Now, if we could sort of make the connection, bridge the gap, and say that, you know what, we may have been
Yeah.
seeing the same thing that this pilot had seen, we might be able to garner more
Well,
attention to the importance of what's happening here.
yeah. Actually, Justin, what he saw was the reverse. It was a
Well,
cube. It
okay,
was a sphere inside a cube, but
okay.
similar. Yes.
Right, and it's very, very strange. So I think, the sighting is sort of, it's sort of the nail in the coffin for me of what's happening down here.
Yeah.
I started out the talk with you guys today about the importance of strange areas like Skinwalker, but this area in particular is highly unusual, and
Yeah.
it really does need more investigation, because it's not just UFOs
Yeah.
people are seeing, right? This goes back hundreds
Yeah.
of years: ghosts, orbs,
Yeah, I mean,
aliens,
yeah,
sea
the
monsters.
shag harbor, the shag. Yeah, it's true. The Maritimes, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, they all have unique
Yeah,
stories. There's something about Southwest Nova Scotia, or as Chris calls it, Southwest Nova, that seems to be a magnet to high strangeness. You look at the Shag Harbor UFO incident. I mean, there was all kinds of multiple sightings, and we will do a show on that again. Actually, um, it's always been fascinating to me, how these things happen in clumps and groups, and maybe Chris maybe very well be a magnet. Chris had an orb sighting at a lake in Dartmouth, and on the night of October 4th, he also had a sighting. What about you, Justin? Did you have any other sightings, say when you were younger? How did you get
yeah. I mean
into
that.
your interest in UFOs in the first place?
Well, my mom was a real witchy woman to begin with. She had a whole collection of books on the occult, going all the way back. So I think somehow I was ingrained in keeping my mind open to the possibilities of what the universe really might hold for us. But I had an
Mm.
experience when I was about, I want to say about 12 years old, on a fishing trip with my father and my sister. We saw something that I was certain had crashed into the woods in Cape Breton. Um, there was no meteorological detail of meteors, satellites going down, whatever. I was mystified. And as soon as that happened, I was hooked. I thought there is
Hmm.
something very unusual here. And I spent my whole life trying to figure out the answers. And maybe that's the reason I keep having these experiences. I found out at my father's place for dinner before he passed away a few years ago. We had a family friend over. I've known her my entire life. I'm into my mid 40s now, pretty much. And she said that when she was, I guess this would have been in the 80s or 90s, she said she pulled off the highway one day because she watched a flying saucer land, and other cars pulled over with her and watched the legs come out of this thing and land behind a clump of trees. It's
Wow.
like, it's all around me somehow, and I feel like
Yeah.
maybe consciousness does play an important role in the relationship we have with this thing. And the outcome of that,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure about.
Right. So, Stan Friedman was always about nuts and bolts, hard metal UFOs. And then you got a guy like Jacques Vallée, who talks about the ethereal aspects of UFOs. And Chris, I think you offer a balanced viewpoint of what could be the
Yeah.
origin of this enigma.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle, and often in bios or when people say, "What am I about?" I say I have a blended view of the
Mhm.
phenomena. And what I mean by that is, yeah, there's room in my world for nuts and bolts and the ETH, but there's more. And one of the things I'd like to point out, one of the great things about me being present that day for that sighting was that not only did I get to observe this interesting daytime sighting that persisted so long and from which we have footage, but I was able to observe these witnesses, these people I know well, and how different they reacted. And let me just say a couple words about that. Justin Brown, our guest here today, he was frazzled. He was beat up by this sighting. He was just wore out, and my. Heather Doucette,
Wow.
our experiencer, who will be a guest in a future episode, Heather was euphoric. And I was concerned at one point. I remember saying, "Girl, are you okay?" Like, I thought she was going to collapse. She was hyperventilating during this. And her response to me, Michael, was, this has been so significant. She goes, "I see these things all the time. I take pictures, but never with a group of people around in the daytime." And she kept getting euphoric. And I was very concerned about her. Interestingly, at this point, Dickie Wickens, who first called me and said, "I'm seeing a UFO over the island," and it took years to interpret the Shag Harbor incident, as that looks at me and says, while this was unfolding that day, he looks at me and says, "Chris, I can't see it right now." So you see what I mean, where you're almost forced to have this blended view. You know what I mean? And by the way, the girls at the Mint, I think, experienced a reality transformation. You hear them on the phone, each one goes to the bathroom at a different time and stays outside. And their words are still being recorded on their phone, and each completely disagreed with how the sighting played out. Great stuff.
The human condition.
The
human
human
condition. Sounds
condition.
like our
You
theme
need two
music is
things.
coming in here. Sounds like we're
Yeah.
going to wrap up here. So listen, very fascinating, this conversation. There's a lot of food for thought here. Justin, thanks so much for coming on and for providing your wonderful footage. And we look forward to getting you on other shows and hearing more about your experiences. And yeah, it was just very interesting. Food for thought for those who say that if there was evidence of UFOs, it'd be on video. Well, there's plenty, isn't there?
Hey, the privilege is all mine. Anything I can do to move the dialogue further, I'm here for. Thank you both.
Right on. Right. Thanks very much. Well, Chris, I guess we'll just wrap it up. Everybody, thanks for watching this episode of FSUFO, and we look forward to seeing you again. And don't forget to subscribe and like the video, of course, and we'll see you back here on the airwaves soon.
Until later.